So there's a few things that I sort of wanted to talk about today. I think the big ones are really, what use we found capital for, who we went to, and why. A bit of the role of product, because I've had the luck to be in the kind of product role for quite a while. And then basically how important it is to be prepared. One of the biggest things, going from one startup immediately into another was really about being prepared and what allows us to sort of raise that money. But quickly, a little bit of background on WooMe. I'm not sure how many people have heard of WooMe over here. Most likely, if you're an 18 to 25-year-old girl or guy, you would have heard of WooMe. And we did quite well in basically focusing on a very big niche in the market, which is sort of in the world of chat roulette and video dating. Managed to very quickly at a time raise a lot of money, but also grow a user base very quickly, but more importantly, figure out a way to pivot from a free model and then get into the whole monetization space, which is what allowed us to raise, basically, I think it was about $17, $18 million all in over the course of 3 years, and then exit to the biggest player in the space. We added our 12 million odd users to their 100 million users. The funny bit was they actually started at exactly the same time as us, but grew way more, quickly and way more interestingly at that time. There was one sort of really big lesson moving from that in terms of finding the right VCs. And we were lucky to have the likes of Index, Atomico, the guys at Mangrove as well, plus a lot of angel investors, and they really helped us, along that path to really get into a really, really interesting space. But at the end of the kind of WooMe experience, when we knew we were selling, we knew we had a profitable user base, we knew it was going quite well, it started becoming a little sort of rudimentary at the end of it, as really managing a business for cash and growth, and it wasn't so much focused on product, like we had a very stable kind of platform, and we wanted to go down that route. But what I always wanted to work on was very much a utility, and we saw a huge, interesting gap in the market for Halo. And I don't know, how many people here have used or heard of Halo so far? That's a pretty good group of people there. What we really wanted to do there was sort of take a very different opportunity, which was how do we create supply before there's actually demand? Because there's this whole chicken and egg kind of problem. And that's what we worked out at the very, very beginning, before we raised any money, before we figured out anything, is how do we get to that point? And what is our monetization model at the beginning of that? And what we were able to do once we kind of figured that out and worked incredibly hard on getting the product together in terms of talking to drivers, to figuring out what they really wanted, is that we actually coined the term well before we even went to Excel, that we were creating a Facebook for drivers. What we wanted to do is get that driver supply on one side, and that is what's really resonated with investors, is the fact that we had something completely different in terms of an approach to the market. And that's something that they really understood in terms of being sticky. And then there's the whole question of, how do you actually exploit that and actually turn that into a business and make it something that's, really quite interesting from that perspective. But what we were able to do at the very beginning is get that model by working with taxi drivers from the very beginning to clean up and design a product that was just so simple and intuitive for them to use, but that sort of involved really weekly meetings with drivers to figure out, what they exactly wanted. And one of the super important parts of what we really did there when we went through and talked to investors, is how that model spreads, how we're actually going to make money off the back of that, is that feasible, and actually testing that in the real world with a group of evangelic drivers before anything was even out in the market, before word had even spread. And our service was being used by about 150 drivers before anything was out in the market, before anyone knew anything, by the time we'd raised, a small kind of seed round. And that was super important. And then really what happened is we figured out, wow, this actually works. We had to change a whole bunch of things in the product. It's not at all what we kind of expected to happen at that point. We changed it, we retested it, we got it out there. And it was at that point that we sat down and said, look, we figured out the model here. What is going to get a big investor to invest in this whole thing? Because our business is incredibly capital intensive. What we want to do, and our basic model is go after one of the 25 big taxi cities in the world. And there are 25 cities in the world that have a turnover in terms of cab fares of 1 billion US, and they were our markets. We figured if we can get traction in those, where we need typically 4,000 or 5,000 cabs, they can be generating quite a bit of revenue every year, and self-supporting, that we can get to where we need to do. And what we did was actually quite rudimentary and boring. We put analytics in our product from day one. we tracked everything from user demographics, driver demographics, their behavior on a week-by-week basis. We did cohort analysis, we did lifetime value analysis, and funnily enough, in the second meeting when we went to Excel, and it's asking us to basically justify all our models and crazy projections why this is going to be $1 billion company, we just whipped out spreadsheets. Very much in sort of the line of how PayPal did things, which was, if you want to argue about something at PayPal in the early days, you had to bring a ream of paper, you had to bring reams of spreadsheets and justify every decision quantitatively. And though we don't justify every single decision that way, that's kind of what we did. And so from the very beginning, we were able to sort of hit the market that way, to sort of hit investors that way with a very, very credible story. And as a result, a lot of the guys we saw were based over in the US. Our investment is from Excel US and UK as well. So they were quite impressed by that. And they were also quite interested in our expansion strategy into the US as well. So that's mainly what this round is for, international expansion and going to the US, mainly the East Coast, because that's where really all the taxis are. And that's sort of really the kind of the core of the model there is to all those people kind of raising capital now. I don't think it's so much of, especially when you're going to this kind of A and B round, it's not so much about, convincing people about anything specifically or different or why my business is great. It's getting down to the nuts and bolts of a demonstrable model that, look, our model works, we actually have a model now, and that the cash is really there. I think one thing you can throw out the window, which is quite nice, is the notion of profitability. Profitability you can throw out the window so long as you've got a path to profitability, because clearly that's what a lot of cash flow is for. You can get to the profitability. But if you can demonstrate this is earning reams of cash, you can work on the profitability aspect. And back at WooMe, when we were sort of young, naive back in 2007, that's something that we really didn't kind of understand. But the one thing I sort of do recommend is anyone who's ever worked in the dating industry is probably one of the most complex businesses, one of the most complex products, one of the most complex and competitive areas in terms of advertising, that you really understand lifetime value, you really understand how to eke out basically a revenue dollar for every single advertising dollar you spend. And I can't really reinforce that in any business that you're at, or any business that you're in, the ability to eke out every single revenue dollar from the marketing dollar that you spend and getting those guys on early, really analytical, really quantitative guys, is what's fundamentally going to change your kind of business there. Another sort of really interesting bit too in terms of working with a variety of different investors, especially kind of in the early days, is selling the dream with the right team. And Halo is a really kind of interesting example. Jay, who's the CEO, has done eCourier before. A lot of the team he was able to take from eCourier in terms of the back end. And we have an incredible mix of very experienced guys. Caspar Woolley, who's one of the co-founders, is a COO, but a COO who's basically run the likes of Pizza Hut or Domino's, I can't remember which one, in this country. Has also run Avis and their car rental business across EMEA. But at the same time, we've also got 19-year-old developers, and we used to have a 17-year-old developer who was better than all our other developers combined. It's all about the right talent and people kind of pulling it all in together to really kind of make it work from the very beginning in that kind of sense. So the team aspect is obviously quite important that way. What I'd also like to do is sort of open it up to any questions that people have about the environment right now. We were very lucky. We talked to probably everyone in the UK in terms of financing. We talked to a lot of people on the East and West Coast in the States. We went through a rather boring route. We went through very methodically. We knew what we needed the cash for. We knew how much we needed. We had a wonderful benchmark in terms of a recent funding round for Uber. Even though we would say we're in a quite different business, a lot of people put us in the same hole until they understand how our business model works, how our users work, how our expansion path works. But they basically set a wonderful precedent in terms of valuation, in terms of funding rounds, in terms of people to talk to. And that really helped us through the kind of process. So that's kind of, the top level stuff that, I can offer on that level. If anyone's got any questions on any sort of specifics about, what path to go down, which people to approach, happy to answer any of those kind of questions as well.
So a slightly different question. Why in the year of the Olympics, Halo is only available in the UK store, given the amount of international visitors in London?
Very good question. What we've seen with the number of competitors is we, from the very beginning, decided to focus very much on our sort of a quality of user experience, feedback, and all the great reviews we've got. I think we're just shy of 1,000 reviews, and our average is just under 5, but it shows up as 5. We found, and we actually surveyed a bunch of the guys who run the app stores both for iTunes and Android, for apps that are quite nation or city specific, that open up internationally. The vast majority of crappy recommendations you get come from people who download it from Australia, who use it, who open it up, and it says, wow, the service doesn't work. So while we've crimped it for a bunch of users, i.e. Americans mainly, we've actually had hundreds of requests for Americans to be able to download it from the US App Store. The upside of that is we've got fantastic ratings and also pent-up demand. We capture all those emails, we capture all those people, and we will market to them. And the next version that we're releasing in about a month, we'll actually start subtly doing that as well.
You mentioned that your competitors showed you which people to talk to. Do you mean that you should go talk to investors who invest in a similar company?
Well, one of the big, I think, advantages of serious big, grade A investors is they get to see everyone. And you have to be very, very careful if you can get in to go see them. They will go and see every business under the sun, so they've got competitive intelligence for obviously all their portfolio companies, but also anyone else coming up as well. And without naming names, the amount of other businesses that we've found out about the absolute intrinsic workings of is phenomenal. But again, it's one of these wonderful risky games. If you go out there and show what you got, it's all a big risk because that all gets exposed to everybody else. So it's very much a game like that. But if you're confident, and go back to Stefan's point before, if you're moving at a great velocity and you're building a great product and stuff is going right, that's a pretty good risk to take. As a result of a few of our investors, they've led to some great conversations to ex-employees of a lot of these startups, some of which we're considering hiring as well. They give us a wonderful insight into what our competitors are doing, where they've fallen down. So there are upsides and downsides.
How did you pitch yourself to the drivers before you had the
I think that's a really, really good question. I think it's one of the hugest differentiators that we really have there. Product is not just about building, a good product. It's about really understanding the people that you're pitching your service and your offering to. And 3 of the co-founders of the company are 3 cab drivers who probably cumulatively have got something like 60-odd years experience as London black cab drivers. Because they're part of the business and so impassioned, none of them actually had smartphones before this whole thing began. None of them. I mean, they were sort of using still StarTax and whatnot. One of them was using his wife's phone whenever he needed it. But these guys had the passion and the vision, and they started a similar company before, which is called Taxi Light, which was all about how do I monetize my journey home and from to and from work, basically, when I'm coming home from Essex or wherever I'm living. And they signed up a few hundred drivers. So they already had this vision to do something that we had to remold into a new product, into a new service. And it was getting those guys in and forming a relationship for everyone in the company. So everyone in our company is encouraged to take Halo. You can take Halos to and from work. It's fantastically expensive, but there's an expectation that if you take it, you feed back about the service. But more importantly, you talk to the drivers, you understand the drivers, and now not only do we have a driver community that has fed back an incredible amount, and up until recently we were doing weekly releases to drivers. It's now probably bi-weekly. The amount that the product has changed is phenomenal, direct to their feedback. When they see that you're responding directly to their feedback, they understand that this is actually a product for them. This isn't something that someone's jamming down their throat. One of our competitors, without naming names, has a unit that goes on the dashboard inside of the car. The cord to the lighter is too short. So every time you kind of turn around, your elbow hits it and the thing flies off the dash. It took them 6 months to issue a new cord. But you'd be surprised how many drivers had the same problem and how many still pick up on it. Whereas with our guys, we have plenty of complaints about the service internally. Oh, change this, change that, it doesn't work. We change it, they forgot what they were complaining about last week. That kind of relationship with those kind of users, now that we kind of understand it a bit better, is something that we're replicating in all the cities that we go to. So we put people on the ground, and what we do is we understand the drivers first. We make our product fit, so we're not trying to do a bespoke product for every city by any stretch. But the things that we can tweak give us basically right now, via the word of mouth, just from drivers, we actually do no driver advertising at all. One of our competitors has got a sales force trying to sell to people on ranks. We've got drivers signing up in their hundreds, I won't say exactly how many, each week. because their mates are saying, yeah, you got to use this. All the other ones, yeah, they've tried, but it don't really work. This one's already got, X thousand drivers on it already.
You chose to raise quite a lot, which presumably creates quite high expectations from your investors. I'm just interested in your decision-making around going for quite so much to be very right.
That's also a really, really good question. Just to jump backwards one step, at WooMe, we needed a lot of money to expand, mainly for marketing and advertising, but I don't think we were at the right point. It was much more of an investor-led process. They said, this is how much of the company we want, here's how much cash is on the table. We thought about valuation a little bit, but frankly, it was really, really tricky. With Halo, what has been absolutely amazing is that we got the cash flow immediately. The day we launched on November 2nd, cash was coming in the door. So that was fantastic. We had the leverage, the analytics behind it, the analysis from day one. And when we started serious negotiations with investors in sort of December, January timeframe, we had that and we were battling with that. And we had a very good idea of where we could go. And that on a week-by-week basis, because we were looking at such resolution, started to make a lot of sense. So everything we projected out made a lot of sense. And at the same time, because we had a precedent with Uber and because of our growth velocity, we justified actually a pretty unbelievable valuation kind of at that point. And so again, it's that perennial question of take the valuation, take the cash, take the dilution, and we balanced out something that made everybody happy kind of in the middle of that as well. But when you look at it, it's actually not that much money when you're trying to get into, and we've announced this publicly, 6 to 8 cities by the end of the year. That doesn't leave a lot for each city to do an incredible job. It actually means your model of expansion and scaling really has to work. And, we've got confidence behind that. And it's also forcing a lot of rigor in everything that we do operationally to make sure that money is spent very, very cleverly.
Can you do what you did in London, but other cities? Because I understand that obviously cultures are different everywhere. And, you grew London well enough because working and getting feedback from the drivers so much. But to expand, obviously, to understand what other drivers in other cities are like.
The answer is we hope so. We have been doing our work. We've been in New York for over a year. Jay's from New York. It's been his dream to launch it over there as well. We're not naive in terms of the difference between cities. And, we're quite quiet in the background. We'll go out there, we'll talk to people, and it's all about finding the right driver representatives. And, to be honest, our model in each city is really, really simple. We get a GM, we get a head of marketing, marketing manager, a social guy, and we find 3 drivers, just like we did in London. And it's finding those 3 drivers that has taken forever in each one of those markets. But now we have a handful of those that are really developing quite well. And once you have that insight, and again, it's London leading. If we didn't have London working as it does now, and hopefully a lot of our resources making that successful, it'll be a very different story.
Actually, 2 questions. One is, as I understand it, it's kind of a marketplace. So usually the question on marketplaces is how do you solve that chicken and egg problem right in the beginning? Because when you have users who want to use the service, but you have no service providers, so what makes the app interesting to the users? So how do you get it off the ground? I mean, now when you have the drivers, it's fairly easy, and because then it's just like growing popularity. But in the beginning, that's I think when most of people try to raise cash, and this is what most of the investors want to see first before they invest. And second question is, you were talking about teams, and directly afterwards we referred to where these people have been working before, and there were the big names and so on. But what happens if someone has not worked with eDarling and Twitter and so on before? So how do just, let's say, a talented person gets himself in the focus and gets the belief from the investors that he's good in executing?
So in terms of the first question, it's very much we went out to create supply before demand. So what we describe our driver app, because we've got 2 apps, one for drivers, one for customers, is Facebook plus Square. So now you can do suddenly any kind of credit card processing. Just type in the number. There's no actual reader, but you can type in the number just like you can on Square. We give that to you at cost. Suddenly you can do it. It's really simple. You fire and forget. You take a payment. We actually take all the risk for it. So now drivers are like fantastic. And the moment you give them their first paycheck, they trust you and love you. Other driver features, two big things that drivers, and this is what we spent months trying to figure out, is, what are their real needs? So it was, take credit cards over here, and that's variable depending on which city you're in. But there are two other big issues that all drivers have in every city in the world. One is loneliness. And basically, it's a solitary job. How do we make it social? We give them chat. They actually all use Kik. They all use Facebook chat. They all use a whole pile of other tools that are not particularly well optimized for being on the road and whatnot, nor is it just driver friends. We figured that bit out. So we actually built a horrendously fun chat backend, a whole friending system as well, and you can track all your driver buddies on a map so you can all pull off for a coffee or a pint in the middle of the day or whatever you want, which is basically the #1 word when you check this chat history of what they're looking at, which is kind of funny. And then there's the third bit, which is optimization of my day. We lose every day around the world $40 million in lost revenue because cab drivers are on average 30% empty. And we reckon we can fill X percentage of that. It's kind of our pitch to investors. So what we did is we formulated that proposition, we translated that into a product, we got driver advocates, we went out there and said, oh yeah, by the way, it's all free. All you need is a smartphone. And then we realized that, if you can't get a smartphone, we got you a deal as well. So for the guys who didn't even have smartphones, we got them a deal for unlimited minutes, unlimited voice for £30 a month from 3Mobile. So that's how we solve that bit. And if you have a really good proposition that drivers can become advocates for, yeah, it starts off slow, but if it's a real proposition, a real product, it'll snowball. The second part, I would say, just get in there and get dirty. Get any investor, start any business, make all those mistakes super quickly. Give away all the equity in your company. Who the hell cares? But do it when you're young. If you're doing it when you're old, well, it's a bit of a bother, right? Because you have to go through that whole cycle and then actually learn something. But, I wouldn't be so fussed about being cheap on equity or cheap with cash early on. It's just the experience that really matters. It's getting out there and delivering something that people care about is the really hard thing. All the other bits can hold you up from doing that. And that's why I was so excited to get involved with this, because I think a utility is one of those few apps where you can target everybody equally well and everyone kind of resonates with the concept. So if you ever get a chance to do it, I would just do it at any cost. Is basically the thing. That's where you learn everything. Well, that was the second one. Great. I think the time's almost up anyway. But thank you.